You want to know how I got my revenge? Pull up a chair, my friend, because this is a story worth telling. Pour yourself a drink, something strong, because by the end of this tale, you'll understand why I'm sitting here in my new penthouse apartment, wearing a smile that hasn't left my face in 6 months, while my ex-wife Sarah is, well, let's just say she's learning some valuable lessons about consequences. My name is David Mitchell, and I'm 42 years old. 6 months ago, I was a different man entirely. I was the kind of husband who brought flowers home on random Tuesdays, who remembered anniversaries and birthdays, who worked 60-hour weeks as an architect to provide the comfortable life my wife had grown accustomed to. I was, in retrospect, a complete fool. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, because the beginning is where the real story lies. Not in the dramatic finale that everyone wants to hear about, but in those quiet moments when a man's world starts to crumble and he has to decide whether he's going to lie down and take it or stand up and fight back. It was a Thursday evening in March when I first noticed something was off. Sarah had been working late more frequently, claiming that the real estate market was booming and she needed to show properties to clients who could only meet after hours. As a devoted husband of 15 years, I believed her. Why wouldn't I? We'd built what I thought was a solid marriage, weathered the usual storms that couples face, and emerged stronger. Or so I believed. That Thursday, she came home at nearly midnight, her hair slightly disheveled, her lipstick gone, and a flush to her cheeks that I hadn't seen in years. When I asked about her evening, she launched into an elaborate story about a difficult client who wanted to see 3 different properties, and then insisted on going for drinks to discuss financing options. The story was detailed, almost too detailed, and delivered with the kind of nervous energy that made my architect's mind, trained to notice when things don't quite fit together, start to pay attention. But it wasn't the story that really caught my attention. It was the smell. Sarah had always been particular about her perfume, wearing the same Chanel fragrance for as long as I'd known her. But that night, underneath her familiar scent, there was something else. Something masculine and expensive. Cologne that definitely wasn't mine. I didn't say anything that night. I'm not the type to make accusations without evidence, and I certainly wasn't ready to believe that my wife of 15 years was capable of betraying our marriage. Instead, I filed the observation away in the back of my mind and went to sleep, telling myself I was being paranoid. The signs multiplied over the following weeks like cracks in a foundation. Sarah started going to the gym more often, buying new lingerie that she claimed was just for herself, and developing a sudden interest in her appearance that went far beyond her usual professional standards. She began guarding her phone like a state secret, taking it with her to the bathroom and sleeping with it under her pillow. When I commented on this new behavior, she laughed it off, claiming she was expecting important calls from clients at all hours. The real breakthrough came 3 weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon when Sarah claimed she had to show a property to a wealthy out-of-town buyer. She'd been gone for 4 hours when I decided to surprise her by bringing lunch to the property she'd mentioned, a luxury condo downtown that had been on the market for months. I knew the building well. I'd actually consulted on some of the architectural modifications for the developer. When I arrived at the building, I asked the doorman about the showing. He looked confused and checked his logs. No real estate agents had been in the building that day. No showings were scheduled. The unit Sarah had mentioned wasn't even available for viewing. It had been sold the previous week. Standing in that marble lobby, holding a bag of Sarah's favorite sandwiches, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. It wasn't just the realization that my wife was lying to me. It was the understanding that she thought I was stupid enough to believe her lies. That she had so little respect for my intelligence that she couldn't even be bothered to construct believable deceptions. I drove home in a strange state of calm. The shock and hurt would come later, but in that moment, I felt something else entirely: curiosity. I wanted to know the full scope of what I was dealing with. I wanted to understand exactly how long this had been going on, who was involved, and what Sarah's endgame might be. Most importantly, I wanted to know what she really thought of me, the husband who had spent 15 years building a life with her. That evening, when Sarah returned home with another elaborate story about her difficult client, I listened with the attention of a detective taking a statement. She spun a tale about the buyer being indecisive and wanting to see several more properties, about grabbing dinner afterward to discuss his specific needs, about the challenges of working with high-maintenance clients. She delivered this fiction while looking me straight in the eye, her voice steady and convincing. As I watched her perform the charade, I realized something that would prove crucial in the weeks to come. Sarah had become very good at lying. This wasn't the fumbling deception of someone new to infidelity. This was polished, practiced, refined, which meant it had been going on for much longer than I'd suspected. That night, after Sarah fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to confront her. I wasn't going to demand explanations or issue ultimatums. I wasn't going to give her the opportunity to spin more lies or, worse, to convince me that I was imagining things. Instead, I was going to find out exactly what I was dealing with. I was going to gather evidence, understand the full scope of the betrayal, and then, only then, would I decide how to respond. Because if there's one thing my years as an architect had taught me, it's that you never start demolition until you fully understand the structure you're dealing with. Little did I know that this decision would lead me down a path that would transform me from a trusting, naive husband into something far more dangerous. A man with nothing left to lose and the intelligence to make that everyone else's problem. The investigation phase of my life began the very next morning. I approached it with the same methodical precision I brought to my architectural projects, because if you're going to tear down someone's world, you need to understand every beam, every support, every weak point in the structure. My first step was technology. Sarah had always been careless with passwords, using variations of the same few combinations for everything. It took me less than an hour to access her email accounts, her social media, and most importantly, her phone records. What I found there painted a picture that was both more extensive and more devastating than I'd imagined. The affair had been going on for 8 months. 8 months of elaborate lies, fabricated work events, and fictional clients. But the real revelation was the identity of her lover. Marcus Webb, a real estate developer who was not only married himself, but was also someone I knew professionally. We'd met at industry events, had even discussed potential collaborations. He was the kind of man who wore his wealth like armor, expensive suits, flashy watch, the sort of aggressive confidence that some women apparently find irresistible. Reading through their text exchanges was like watching a masterclass in mutual delusion. Sarah painted herself as trapped in a loveless marriage with a boring, predictable husband who didn't appreciate her. Marcus positioned himself as her knight in shining armor, promising to leave his own wife and whisk Sarah away to a life of luxury and passion. They spoke about me with a casual cruelty that was almost impressive in its thoroughness. I was David the Dull, the architect of mediocrity. The man who builds other people's dreams because he's too boring to have his own. But here's what made it truly interesting. Neither of them had any intention of actually leaving their marriages. Sarah's messages revealed that she had no desire to give up the financial security I provided, and Marcus's communications made it clear that he had no intention of divorcing his wife, who came from old money and whose family connections were crucial to his business empire. They were both playing a game, using each other for excitement while planning to maintain their comfortable lives indefinitely. This discovery was the moment when my hurt transformed into something much more useful. Cold, calculating anger. They weren't just betraying their spouses. They were doing it with a smug sense of superiority, convinced that they were smarter than everyone around them. They thought they could have their cake and eat it too, that they could manipulate the people who loved them without consequence. That's when I decided they needed to learn about consequences. My investigation expanded over the following weeks. I hired a private investigator not to confirm what I already knew, but to gather the kind of evidence that would be useful later. I learned Marcus's routines, his business practices, his weaknesses. I discovered that his real estate empire was built on a foundation of creative financing and regulatory shortcuts. Nothing illegal, necessarily, but the kind of practices that wouldn't survive close scrutiny from the right authorities. I also learned about his wife, Patricia Webb. She was everything Sarah wasn't: old money, sophisticated, connected to the city's social elite. More importantly, she was the daughter of the man who controlled the zoning board that Marcus's projects depended on. Their marriage wasn't just personal. It was a business alliance that kept Marcus's empire profitable. Meanwhile, I began documenting everything about Sarah's deception. Every lie, Every fabricated story, every dollar she'd spent on her affair. I tracked the expensive lingerie purchases, the mysterious charges at high-end restaurants, the hotel rooms booked during her supposed client meetings. I built a comprehensive file that painted a picture of systematic deception and financial infidelity. But documentation wasn't enough. I needed leverage, and leverage required understanding what each of them valued most. For Sarah, it was the lifestyle I provided, the house, the cars, the social status that came with being married to a successful architect. For Marcus, it was his business empire and his reputation in the community. That's when I began to construct my plan. The beauty of being an architect is that you learn to think in systems. Every building is a complex interaction of forces, supports, and vulnerabilities. Remove the right support at the right time, and the entire structure comes down. The same principle applies to people's lives. I started with Marcus's business. Using my professional connections, I began asking subtle questions about his projects, his financing, his regulatory compliance. I attended city planning meetings where his developments were discussed. I cultivated relationships with building inspectors, zoning officials, and environmental regulators. I wasn't looking to frame him for anything he hadn't done. I was simply ensuring that his creative interpretations of building codes and environmental regulations would receive the scrutiny they deserved. Simultaneously, I began preparing for the dissolution of my marriage. I moved money into accounts Sarah didn't know about, documented our assets, and consulted with the best divorce attorney in the city. I learned about adultery laws, about how infidelity could affect property division, about the various ways a cheating spouse could find themselves in a very disadvantageous position. But the real masterstroke came when I realized how to turn Sarah and Marcus against each other. You see, their affair was built on a foundation of mutual lies. Sarah believed Marcus was going to leave his wife for her. Marcus believed Sarah was a sophisticated woman trapped in an unhappy marriage. Neither of them understood that the other was playing the same game they were, using the affair for excitement while having no intention of actually changing their circumstances. I decided to help them understand the truth about each other. It started with anonymous tips. A few carefully worded emails to Patricia Webb's personal assistant, suggesting that Mrs. Webb might want to pay closer attention to her husband's business trips. Some strategic information shared with Sarah's real estate colleagues about her mysterious new client who seemed to require so much after-hours attention. Nothing direct, nothing traceable, just enough to plant seeds of suspicion in the right minds. Then I began feeding each of them information about the other. I created a fake email account and sent Sarah screenshots of Marcus's messages to other women, messages I'd found during my investigation that proved she wasn't his only extramarital interest. I sent Marcus copies of Sarah's credit card statements showing expensive purchases that she'd claimed were gifts from him, making it clear that she was funding her lifestyle improvements with my money, not his. The effect was immediate and beautiful to watch. Their passionate text exchanges became increasingly suspicious and accusatory. Sarah began demanding that Marcus prove his commitment by leaving his wife. Marcus began questioning whether Sarah was really the sophisticated woman he'd thought she was, or just another suburban housewife looking for excitement. But I wasn't done. The final phase of my plan required perfect timing and a deep understanding of human psychology. I needed them to destroy each other completely, and I needed it to happen in a way that would leave me not just free of my marriage, but genuinely better off than I'd been before. The opportunity came when Marcus's biggest development project, a luxury high-rise that would make or break his company, came up for final approval before the city council. This was his masterpiece, the project that would cement his reputation and secure his financial future. It was also a project that depended on several regulatory variances that existed in a legal gray area. I made sure those variances received very thorough review. At the same time, I arranged for Sarah to discover that Marcus had been lying to her about his intentions. I didn't have to fabricate anything. I simply ensured that she found the evidence that was already there. His communications with his wife about renewing their wedding vows. His discussions with business partners about the importance of maintaining his marriage for professional reasons. His messages to other women that proved Sarah was just one of several affairs he was managing. The confrontation between them was spectacular. Sarah, feeling betrayed and used, decided to get her revenge by exposing Marcus to his wife. She sent Patricia Webb a detailed account of the affair, complete with photos, messages, and a timeline of their relationship. She thought she was destroying Marcus while positioning herself as the wronged party who deserved sympathy. What she didn't realize was that Patricia Webb was not the kind of woman who would suffer such humiliation quietly. Within 24 hours, Patricia had not only filed for divorce, but had also shared the information with her father, the man who controlled the zoning board. Marcus's development project was suddenly facing a comprehensive review that would take months to complete. Months his financing couldn't survive. Marcus, watching his empire crumble, lashed out at Sarah with a viciousness that surprised even me. He blamed her for destroying his marriage and his business. He threatened to expose her to me, not realizing that I already knew everything. He cut off all contact with her and began desperately trying to salvage his relationship with his wife. Sarah, meanwhile, found herself completely isolated. Her affair was now public knowledge in her professional circles, thanks to Patricia Webb's connections. Her lover had abandoned her, and she was about to discover that her husband, the boring, predictable man she'd been betraying for 8 months, was not quite as naive as she'd believed. The evening I chose to reveal my hand was a Friday in November. Sarah had come home from what she claimed was a particularly difficult day at work, though I knew from my monitoring that she'd actually spent the afternoon crying in her car after Marcus had sent her a brutal message telling her never to contact him again. She was emotionally devastated, professionally humiliated, and completely unaware that her world was about to get much worse. I had prepared for this moment with the same attention to detail I brought to my most important architectural projects. Every document was organized, every piece of evidence was cataloged, and every legal strategy was in place. I had even arranged for a photographer to document the condition of our house and belongings, because I suspected that Sarah's reaction to my revelations might be dramatic. She walked into our living room expecting sympathy from her boring, predictable husband. Instead, she found me sitting calmly in my favorite chair with a glass of wine and a manila folder that contained the complete record of her 8-month affair. "We need to talk," I said, and something in my tone made her freeze in the doorway. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I simply opened the folder and began reading from her text messages with Marcus. Her face went through a fascinating progression of emotions: confusion, recognition, fear, and finally a kind of desperate calculation as she tried to figure out how much I knew and whether she could still lie her way out of the situation. "How long have you known?" she asked, which was an interesting choice for a first question. Not, "I can explain," or "it's not what you think," but a tactical inquiry designed to help her calibrate her response. 8 months, I replied. "I've known for exactly as long as it's been going on." The color drained from her face as the implications hit her. 8 months of thinking she was cleverly deceiving me, when in reality I had been watching, documenting, and planning. 8 months of feeling superior to her boring husband, when that husband had been orchestrating the destruction of her affair from the shadows. "I suppose you want a divorce," she said, and I could see her mind working, trying to figure out how to minimize the damage to herself. "Oh, Sarah," I said, and I'm sure my smile was not particularly pleasant. "A divorce is the least of your problems." That's when I began to explain what had really been happening over the past few months. How I had been the one feeding information to Patricia Webb. How I had orchestrated the exposure of Marcus's business practices. How I had manipulated both of them into destroying each other while I watched from a safe distance. Her face went through another fascinating progression as she realized the scope of what I had done. The anonymous tips that had led to Marcus's downfall. The mysterious information that had reached Patricia Webb. The perfectly timed revelations that had turned her lover against her. It had all been me, the boring husband she had so thoroughly underestimated. "You destroyed his marriage," she whispered, and I could see her trying to process the idea that her predictable husband was capable of such calculated revenge. "No," I corrected her. "You destroyed his marriage when you sent those photos and messages to his wife. I simply made sure you had the motivation to do it. The beauty of my plan was that I had never actually done anything illegal or even particularly unethical. I had simply ensured that the truth came to light and that the consequences of Sarah and Marcus's actions fell on them rather than on their innocent spouses. Every piece of information I had shared was factual. Every revelation I had orchestrated was based on evidence of their actual behavior. Sarah tried several different approaches over the next hour. She attempted to minimize the affair, claiming it was just a mistake that meant nothing. She tried to blame Marcus, painting herself as a victim of his manipulation. She even attempted to seduce me, suggesting that we could work through this and emerge stronger as a couple. But I had spent 8 months watching her lie to my face with practiced ease. I had read her messages describing me as boring and predictable. I had seen her laugh about my naivety with her lover. There was no coming back from that level of betrayal and contempt. Here's what's going to happen, I told her, pulling out a second folder. You're going to sign these divorce papers, which my attorney has already prepared. You're going to accept the settlement I'm offering, which is far more generous than what you'd receive if this went to court and your adultery became part of the public record. And you're going to do it quietly, without drama, because the alternative is much worse for you. She tried to bluster, threatening to fight me in court, claiming she deserved half of everything we'd built together. That's when I showed her the third folder, the one containing documentation of every dollar she'd spent on her affair, every lie she'd told, every way she had violated the trust and financial agreements of our marriage. Your affair cost me approximately $37,000, I explained. The hotels, the restaurants, the lingerie, the gifts you bought for Marcus with our joint credit cards. In this state, adultery affects property division, and financial infidelity is taken very seriously by family court judges. You can take the generous settlement I'm offering, or you can explain to a judge why you think you deserve half of our assets after spending our money on your lover. The fight went out of her then. She signed the papers, but I wasn't finished. The final element of my revenge was perhaps the most satisfying, because it addressed the thing that had hurt me most about her betrayal. Not just that she had cheated, but that she had done it with such contempt for my intelligence. There's one more thing, I said as she prepared to leave our house for the last time. Marcus's development project, the one that's been delayed by all those regulatory reviews? I thought you should know that those reviews were initiated by anonymous tips from someone with detailed knowledge of building codes and environmental regulations. Someone who knew exactly which agencies to contact and which violations to highlight. She stared at me, the full scope of my involvement finally becoming clear. You didn't just destroy our marriage, she said. You destroyed his entire business. No, I corrected her again. His business was destroyed by his own corner-cutting and regulatory violations. I simply made sure those violations received the attention they deserved. Just like your affair was destroyed by your own lies and betrayals. I simply made sure the truth came to light. The last I heard, Marcus's company had filed for bankruptcy. His wife had taken him for everything in their divorce, and his reputation in the real estate community was permanently damaged. He'd gone from being a wealthy developer to being a cautionary tale about the dangers of mixing business with pleasure. Sarah, meanwhile, had been forced to leave the real estate agency where she'd worked, since her affair with a client had become public knowledge. She'd moved to a smaller apartment across town and taken a job with a discount real estate firm that specialized in low-end properties. Her lifestyle had been dramatically downgraded, and her professional reputation was in ruins. As for me, well, that's where this story gets truly satisfying. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my new penthouse apartment, the one I bought with the money I saved by not having to split our assets 50-50 with an adulterous wife. The view is spectacular, the mortgage is manageable, and every morning when I wake up, I'm reminded that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well. My architectural firm has never been more successful. Freed from the emotional drain of managing a failing marriage and the financial burden of supporting Sarah's expensive tastes, I've been able to focus entirely on my work. I've landed 3 major projects in the past 6 months, including the contract to design the replacement for Marcus's failed development. The irony is delicious. I'm now building the project that his corner-cutting and regulatory violations made impossible. But the professional success is just the beginning. The real victory is personal. For 15 years, I had been living with a woman who saw me as boring, predictable, and naive. I had internalized her view of me, accepting that I was the kind of man who built other people's dreams because I was too dull to have my own. Her betrayal, as devastating as it was initially, forced me to discover that I was capable of far more than either of us had imagined. I learned that I could be patient when patience was required, ruthless when ruthlessness was necessary, and strategic in ways that would have impressed Machiavelli himself. I discovered that the analytical skills that made me a good architect also made me exceptionally good at understanding human psychology and predicting behavior. Most importantly, I learned that I didn't need someone else's validation to feel valuable. The dating scene at 42 has been interesting. Women seem to find the story of my divorce fascinating, though I'm careful about how much I reveal. There's something appealing, apparently, about a man who doesn't just accept betrayal but responds to it with intelligence and precision. I've been seeing a lovely woman named Elena, a fellow architect who appreciates both my professional skills and my personal resilience. She knows the broad strokes of what happened with Sarah, and her response was refreshingly direct. Good for you. Some people need to learn that actions have consequences. The financial benefits of my revenge have been substantial as well. The generous settlement I offered Sarah was still far less than what I would have lost in a contested divorce, especially once her adultery and financial infidelity were factored in. I kept the house, most of our investments, and my retirement accounts. More importantly, I'm no longer supporting someone who was actively working against our marriage while spending our money on her lover. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of my revenge is how perfectly it addressed the core of Sarah's betrayal. She hadn't just cheated on me. She had done it while believing I was too stupid to notice, too boring to matter, and too weak to respond. Her affair was built on a foundation of contempt for my intelligence and character. My response proved that she had fundamentally misunderstood the man she was married to. The boring, predictable husband she had mocked in her messages to Marcus turned out to be capable of orchestrating a revenge so comprehensive and elegant that it destroyed not just her affair but her lover's entire life. The man she had dismissed as naive had outmaneuvered both of them so thoroughly that they had ended up destroying each other while he watched from the shadows. Every time I think about Sarah in her discount apartment, working for a cut-rate real estate firm and explaining to potential clients why her previous employer let her go, I feel a warm glow of satisfaction. Every time I imagine Marcus trying to rebuild his reputation in an industry where everyone knows he lost everything because he couldn't keep his marriage vows, I smile. They thought they were so clever, so sophisticated, so much smarter than the boring people they were betraying. They believed they could have their excitement and their security, their passion and their stability, their cake and the ability to eat it too. They were convinced that they were the protagonists in their own romantic drama, while their spouses were just supporting characters who existed to provide financial security and social respectability. My revenge taught them that they were wrong about everything. They weren't the clever ones. They were the marks in a con game they didn't even realize they were playing. They weren't sophisticated. They were predictable in their selfishness and arrogance. And they certainly weren't smarter than the people they were betraying. The most beautiful part is that I never had to become someone I wasn't. I didn't have to lie, cheat, or break any laws. I simply used the intelligence and analytical skills I'd always possessed, applied them to a problem that needed solving, and executed a plan with the same precision I brought to my architectural projects. I took the tools that made me good at my profession and used them to dismantle the people who had tried to make me a victim. Some people might say that my revenge was excessive, that I should have simply divorced Sarah and moved on with my life. But those people don't understand the nature of the betrayal I experienced. This wasn't just about adultery. It was about contempt. Sarah and Marcus didn't just break their marriage vows. They did it while laughing at the people they were betraying, convinced that they were superior beings who deserved to take whatever they wanted without consequences. My revenge was a lesson in consequences. It was a demonstration that actions have results, that betrayal has costs, and that underestimating someone can be a very expensive mistake. It was justice served with the precision of a surgical strike and the satisfaction of a job well done. As I sit here in my penthouse, looking out at the city where I'm building my new life, I sometimes think about the man I was 6 months ago. That man was trusting, perhaps to a fault. He was generous with his love and his resources. He believed in the fundamental goodness of the person he had chosen to share his life with. That man is gone, and I don't mourn his passing. In his place is someone stronger, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous to those who would try to take advantage of him. I'm still generous with people who deserve it, still trusting with those who earn it, but I'm no longer naive about human nature or the lengths some people will go to in service of their own selfish desires. The best revenge, they say, is living well. But sometimes, the best revenge is making sure that the people who wronged you learn exactly what kind of person they chose to betray. Sometimes, the best revenge is teaching them that their victims are not as helpless as they assumed, and that consequences have a way of finding people who think they're too clever to face them. Sarah and Marcus learned those lessons the hard way. And every morning when I wake up in my beautiful apartment, free from the weight of a failing marriage and surrounded by the success I've built with my own hands, I'm reminded that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys really do win in the end. The boring, predictable architect got the last laugh after all.